Sclerotinia, white mold. Commonly we're just talking about this as white mold, but this is one of the worst diseases that a farmer can get in soybeans, in sunflowers, and a number of different crops. Let's talk a little about what it is, where it comes from, and what you do to stop it.
Okay, well, these little soybeans here, we aren't too worried about white mold just yet when they're real small.
Right.
But as the season progresses, as we get up into those reproductive stages, we're always looking at where can that infection get into the plant. And with soybeans, what happens is we've got a lot of blossoms that are going to happen in July for us and into August. And as we have all these blossoms, the plants abort quite a few of them. And as those flowers die off, that's a spot where infection can get into the plants. That's also about the time that white mold is going to start in your fields. So you really have to be careful once we get into the reproductive stages in soybeans.
Okay, that's later on in the season though. I want to back it up just a little bit. Let's talk about right at the beginning of the season or even the fall before. What you'll find out in fields is after white mold has been in your field, there will be little what's called sclerotia, little black pieces out there, little black chunks out there. There is a product that you can spray on your farm called Contans. Now, we've only used a little bit of this on our farm. We've never seen any real big gain, but we've never had a serious white mold problem either. I mean, we've had some white mold, no huge deal. But there are many farmers I've talked to that they swear by Contans now. They'll use it either in the fall or in the spring, and they'll spray just on bare ground, and that does biologically suppress these sclerotia. So it in effect controls them so you don't have the white mold later on in the year. Okay, so white mold is a fungus, and what's going to happen is once the season gets going, if there is ample moisture, and especially if there gets to be some crop canopy even, then you start seeing little mushrooms that will pop up if you get wetter conditions for a few days. Well, those little mushrooms can shoot spores out, and that's the white mold that then can infect the plants.
Okay, so you say, all right, well, I didn't get Contans down this spring, so here I am, we're going into these reproductive phases here real soon. What can I do to protect myself? Well, you can certainly use some foliar fungicide. Like Brian said, white mold is a fungus, so you can use fungicide to control it. But you have to pick the right ones because not every fungicide has activity on this particular disease. The one that we like the most and that we use on our farm is a product called Domark. Now, if you know you've got a white mold issue or you're really concerned that it could be an issue in certain fields, you need to get out there at R1. So at first bloom, get out there with an application of Domark. Then come back at first pod and put another application on. And you may say, wait a second, there's no way I can get over all my acres with 2 applications. If you're gonna just do 1 application, I would probably shoot somewhere in the middle at mid to full bloom.
All right, Darren mentioned Domark, but there's also Topsin or Incognito. There is Proline too in several other crops. A lot of farmers are using Proline with pretty good success. We think it's maybe just a little bit hard on soybeans. You gotta be a little careful with the rate and that kind of thing. But the number one thing I would tell you with white mold is you've gotta be out there ahead of time. If you start seeing major white mold infection in your crop, that's typically when farmers will call us and say, oh, I got white mold all over the place, now what do I do? Well, I'm sorry, but you already lost a bunch of yield. It's too late to do anything to recover that yield you've already given up.
Now with white mold, there are just a few other things. When you're out in those fields that have white mold this year, consider doing some tillage in those areas. If you're in a no-till situation, you had lots of white mold, then crop rotation is going to be one of the things you're going to have to do.
Well, you may still have white mold issues because the sclerotia can live for many years in the soil. It's just every year you go away from a susceptible crop, you're much less likely to have a problem going forward. The other thing is farmers talk about going to wider rows. Even in our own operation, we used to see more white mold problem when we were drilling and we had soybeans every 7 inches as opposed to today where we have soybeans every 30 inches.
Yep. The other thing, Brian, of course, is variety selection that we want to talk about. And there really aren't varieties that are completely resistant to white mold, but there certainly is a difference in tolerance.
All right, one last thing I wanted to talk about with white mold was this. There are some herbicides out there that have fungicidal properties, Darren.
I don't know if I necessarily believe that, Brian, but there are certainly some herbicides that could help on white mold.
Okay, so Cobra, for example, that gets talked about in soybeans a lot. And actually, when you look at the tests, Cobra is not that much worse than the fungicidal treatments.
Oh, and some it's even better.
Right, because Cobra a lot of times will thin out the soybean plants. You're going to get more air movement through there, and when you have more air movement, you are going to have fewer problems with white mold.
Well, there's certainly a lot of diseases that could impact crops. White mold is one of them. You need to manage it with something pre-emerge like Contans, and then you need to come back in later on with a fungicide as well. And you may be able to mix those fungicides right with some weed control to control our weed of the week. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed coming up next.